Anthony Hardwick here as YSN continues its series, Legends of the Past. I'm joined by South Range's own Chris Hatch, all the way from Arizona. Chris, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Happy to be here with you, Anthony.
Now, I know we're making you go way back in your memory bank all the way to 2001, but what are some of your fond memories of South Range basketball and being in that program?
Oh, man. It's a good question. There's plenty of good memories. The things that I probably miss the most are not necessarily the games themselves, probably the routine of going to practice and being around the team. We had such a close community. Like the entire South Range community is pretty small. So, everybody knows each other. Everybody's sort of a family friend. So that aspect of playing basketball for South Range was big for me. Tried to find places to live since then that sort of look like that and feel like that. But nothing really does compare to playing at South Range. The games themselves were amazing. If you remember, we played in a different gymnasium than what they have now. And, it was small. It was, we had fans like sort of straddling the out of bounds lines and things like that. Not much room between the basket and the wall. So it was a great atmosphere, always a loud crowd, always fun to play in front of them.
Now, yeah, you talk about that gym. Not a lot of room there between the baseline and the wall. What kind of challenges did that kind of present, not just to you, but to the opposing team that's not used to that?
Yeah, it was different. It was definitely different. To run full speed and jump off one leg and try to make a layup, like you had to really brace yourself to come down. But at the same time, the challenge for us wasn't playing in that gym. The challenge was going to other gyms that had a bunch of space behind the backboards, right? That had a bunch of space like on the sidelines. We weren't used to that. So depth perception was always something we had to get used to, probably in the middle of the second quarter. But we eventually got used to it and obviously did our best to win some games.
Were there any moments in that gym where you forgot how much room you had and you just put your whole body on the line to get a ball or to make a hoop or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I remember going into the stands a couple of times chasing balls. I remember, when we would play Springfield, our rival, we couldn't fit everybody in the gym. So we lined folding chairs in front of the first row of the bleachers. And when you sat down, if you had to take the ball out of bounds on that side of the court, you had to ask people to move because they were physically in the field of play. Like they were on the court and you had to make room just to get the game going again. So it was unique. It was very, very unique, but obviously loved every minute of it.
Nowadays, it seems like kids are getting 1,000 points left and right. It's becoming a little bit more common with the talent level going up. Talk about your moment and getting 1,000 points and what that meant to you.
Yeah, I remember that. It was awesome. It was an away game when I got it. It was at Louisville, I believe. And early on in the game, I knew I was only within a few points, so I knew it was coming that game. But I also remember having a terrible game after that. My coach, Coach McHugh, had lined up for the game to be stopped and for them to recognize it, which was flattering and obviously overwhelming for them to do it. But I remember really stinking it up after that. I don't know if I scored again, to be honest. I had a really bad game, got to that milestone, and then sort of checked out for the rest of the game.
Was it kind of awkward having an away team stop the game and honor you as an away crowd?
Very. Surprised. I mean, if it was at home, I would have been sort of more prepared for it. But very surprising. And honestly, looking back on it, it's kind of indicative of Youngstown, of the Mahoning Valley, where everybody sort of does care about each other, regardless of school district lines and things like that. So I'm grateful for that. But it was surprising and a little bit weird.
Now, the last couple of weeks of YSN, we've been talking about the local rivalries, and from your perspective, that Springfield South Range rivalry, what was that like? What was playing in that game like? Basketball's always been very heated in that rivalry. What was that rivalry like for you?
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was always intense and usually unfortunate because they were, in my 4 years, they were typically better than us. They had some unbelievable athletes on those teams that were and still are to this day pretty good friends of a lot of us that we played against. So it was always very intense. And it was always coming off of a very intense football season when those players were playing against each other. And then the football players that came to play basketball knew each other from the football season. And the football players that didn't play basketball were always in the stands yelling at each other, yelling at us. So obviously, I remember the intensity of those games, especially in the tournament over at Salem. Those games were really, really intense too. I think we played against them maybe twice, 2 or 3 times in the tournament, maybe my freshman and junior years or something like that. But always highly competitive. It was always one of those games that, you know, to the team, whichever team was better, it didn't really matter. Somebody was going to come to play. You were always going to get their best. And, you know, we won some and we lost some. I think we lost more than we won against them, but always a good rivalry.
Now, talk about the coaching staff that you were under and kind of the ways they kind of molded you from freshman to senior year. It's a historic coach with Coach McHugh, and I'm sure even to this day you're kind of proud that you were under him.
Very, very proud. And he's been a tremendous supporter of me and my family since high school, to be honest with you. So those 4 years, you know, that we had there were, you know, on the heels of some pretty good teams before me and before, you know, the years that I was there. I remember my cousin played on a very, very good team there in the, you know, late 90s. So he was a really, really good players coach. He let us, you know, sort of do our thing. He realized that we had some talent, that we loved to play, that we were playing all summer long, prepping for the season, and that we wanted to play a certain style. And he didn't, you know, necessarily come in with a system that said, you guys are going to conform to this. He looked at what our talents were and said, let's work with what you guys prefer to do, which, you know, was cross half court and shoot it for me. And for guys like, you know, Jacob Moore and some of the other great players that we played with, it was get out and run and get up and down the court as much as you could. And he let us do that. He gave us a ton of freedom.
If you had to kind of describe the style of South Range basketball when you were there, what would it be?
Oh man. I mean, I'm trying to think, in our, might be my sophomore year, my junior year, maybe we were really fast paced. It was a little bit like the NBA is now. It's a lot of spacing and a lot of guys that can dribble and shoot threes, and not necessarily a you know, walk the ball up the court and run a specific offense until you get a good shot. We were trying to play fast paced. We were trying to press and force turnovers. So you know, we were one of the faster paced teams, I think, in the Valley at the time. It ended up in some pretty exciting games. I think we were in the 80s and 90s a few times. I think we broke 100 once or twice, but I think the format was fit to the talent, fit to what we wanted to do and get out and run.
Back then, I mean, were you pretty much the only team in the area that kind of played like that, such spaced, and then relied on such a strong caliber offense?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I don't know if we were the only team, but it wasn't normal for a team to try to do that with us, right? One of the, you know, the scouting report against us was to try to slow it down. And I remember some games that were terribly frustrating and terribly annoying, that, you know, teams were going 4 corners and you know, wearing out the clock and trying to keep the game in the 40s and 50s. And we weren't built for that. We struggled with it and we had to sort of adapt to it. But I don't know other teams that were trying to do that. I'm sure there were some, but, you know, for our schedule and teams that we played against, it was mostly, you know, teams were reading the scouting report and trying to do the opposite and not do that with us.
Now, you went and continued your basketball career at Westminster. What was your recruiting process like as you were going through South Range, and what kind of made you choose Westminster?
Yeah, good question. I had a lot of schools that I was looking at, and all of them, I mean, most of the realistic ones were, you know, Division II or Division III. And I chose Westminster because of my comfort level with the coaching staff, and I had some relationships with guys through summer leagues and through summer basketball tournaments that were going there too. So it ended up being a really good fit for me on the basketball side of things, and then academically too. It was, you know, Westminster's 45 minutes from our hometown, and you know, easy to get back and forth. And I wasn't good enough to go to Ohio State and play or play any of the MAC schools or anything like that, but had a great 4 years at Westminster.
And we've been talking about it at YSN for a while. The small school versus large school and how that affects the recruiting process. Do you think that maybe if you were playing at a bigger school, you would have been able to kind of get exposure from different teams, or do you think that you did a pretty good job of getting yourself out there and getting all the eyes that you could on you?
I think that probably at the time, late 90s, early 2000s, that might have had an impact. But now, you can YouTube anybody's mixtape. You can YouTube anybody's highlight film. It doesn't matter where they go to school. And it might not even be highlights from their own high school. It's mostly AAU stuff. So the exposure is a lot easier now. When I was, getting out of high school, I remember my grandfather buying an extra VCR so that he could make highlight tapes for me with 2 VCRs. That like to say that out loud sounds ridiculous now. It's just we're so far past that level of technology, and it's so much easier to do what we need to do, that that doesn't exist anymore. So it's probably much easier now.
Um, no, what was your recruitment process like? What kind of things did you have to do personally to kind of get yourself out there? Were you sending the tapes out to coaches, or did you
Yeah.
Coach McHugh handle that?
I coach with some and communicate. Honestly, my 8th grade coach, Coach Cook, was some highlight tapes, and at the time, getting college coaches to come to South Range was cool. That was a big deal, and they would do it. Those small schools that were looking at players from schools like South Range, schools like Poland, schools like the other local, Mahoning Valley high schools that had good programs and good athletes. They spent some time in Northeast Ohio. They spent some time in the Mahoning Valley. So there were coaches that came. Westminster was one that came to South Range to see us play and everything. So it was a pretty standard process. Sent out some highlight tapes. We went to some camps as a team in the summer, and I went to 5-star basketball camp in Pittsburgh over the summer for a few years, and got some name recognition for some of those local schools then. But a lot of it was coaches coming to South Range to see us play.
Now, right now, everyone's talking about senior seasons, and because all the spring sports seniors have lost theirs, and some of the basketball teams even lost theirs. West Branch girls were on the court warming up for their state championship game, and they got called off the court. So, what are some of the things that you really remember most about your senior year of high school, and the things that you treasure most about that?
My senior year of high school, I remember going by really quickly. I remember the basketball season going by really, really quickly. And, for the first time, I had played with some other great South Range players. I mentioned Jacob Moore, Jeff Fishel was one of them, some other great athletes, Nick Toy. But my senior year was the first time that I ever really had to be a leader. It was the first time I ever really had to step up and be a voice in the locker room, because we had other people doing that up until then. So that was big for me. It was a younger team. We only had 2 seniors on the team, myself and Adam Shirey, and we had a younger group. So it was a process of leading more vocally than I had in the past. But I remember it happening really, really fast. And then our senior year was the year that we dropped down to the Division 4 level, which I don't think exists anymore. Maybe it does and maybe it doesn't. I don't know the divisions anymore, but we dropped down to D4 and had that tournament over at Struthers, which was honestly, it was great. And we ended up losing in the championship there, but completely different vibe, completely different atmosphere as opposed to going to Salem. So that was a little bit different too.
Now, you obviously got to go and you got to do the graduation thing, and all the graduations now are different too. How did you handle graduation? Were you looking forward to it? Was it important to you, or was it more of a for the parents thing in your eyes?
That was for mom and dad. No, I was not the greatest student in the world. It was one of those things that I wanted to get over with so that I could go to a graduation party and enjoy the food. It was an honor, obviously, and we're incredibly proud of graduating from South Range and having the class that we had. Not just athletes, everybody in that class was great. So it was cool to do. I'm not gonna lie and say I was super invested in it. I was probably 18 years old and probably wanted to get out of there.
Talk about what made you so proud that you kind of went to South Range and you're part of that community.
Yeah, a lot of the kids at South Range, and I don't know if it's still like this, but when I graduated, there was a pretty large portion of that graduating class, which was small to begin with, something like 80 or 85 kids. A large percentage of that graduating class had gone K through 12. So we were, lifers basically. It wasn't we didn't show up as sophomores and then finish our time or anything like that. It was, we spent all of our time in, elementary school, going through the North Lima building, watching the high school kids on the other side of the building. And then in the middle of it all, going over to Greenford and having middle school there and junior high there, and then coming back to North Lima where the high school was at the time, and making that home for a really long time. So many of us were there the entire time, K through 12, like I said, that it became home. It became a really, really special place. And it still is to this day. It's weird to drive through there and know that it's not the high school anymore. And I think my, classmates would probably say something similar. But yeah, just having that experience and having the permanence of it, starting from the beginning and then finishing all together, made it pretty special.
Did you have any mixed emotions when they kind of went to a new building and that building wasn't going to be South Range anymore?
No, I wouldn't say it's mixed emotions. It's good. It's a good thing. It's good for the school. It's good for the school district. The land that they're on right now is actually close to where I grew up, right down the street from the home I grew up in, where my parents still live. And it's where I grew up playing baseball, and I'm really, really familiar with it, and everybody at South Range sort of is. So I think it was a really, really good move. I didn't have mixed emotions about it. I do miss, when I go back to high school basketball games at South Range, I do miss the stage.
Yes.
Where all the students sat. If you remember that was, I think, what added to the culture. It wasn't a normal one set of bleachers on one side, the same thing on the other. They had that stage that was built in for all the South Range students to sit, and it got really loud back there and kind of rowdy sometimes. So I miss that part of the culture of the basketball games. But honestly, the school being where it is now is a great thing for the school, and I know that there's great leadership there that is making really, really strong decisions for those students.
Well, I'll tell you, when I was a student in my first 3 years of high school, we still had that stage, and it was kind of like a rite of passage. You're a high school student, you get to go sit up there now because no one else really sat up there except for the students. It was like your own little spot, your rite of passage. You get to sit there now.
Yeah, exactly. There were no parents up there.
Now, you played with Jeff Fishel, and I don't know if you know, but he's now the varsity girls coach, first year. Now,
Yeah.
when you look back at playing with him, did you kind of envision him like, man, this kid's going to be a coach one day?
I don't know if I had the foresight to think of it then, but it makes perfect sense to me now because he was a student of the game. He was, my sophomore year was probably one of our better years as a team. And he basically in the summertime built a gym in his garage for us to work out in, to get ready for the season. So to say that he wasn't, like, he was dedicated. He was, going into that season, he was like legitimately focused on being a great, great player and having a great season. And he did it. And he made, I was a guard and he was a big guy, but he was a pretty athletic big guy who had good hands and good touch and, made shots around the basket all the time, made life really easy on me. So to see him being a coach now, I'm not surprised, but it's not like I could have predicted it back then.
Now, you didn't have any company for a while. For a long time, you were the only boy to have 1,000 points in South Range program history. Finally got some company with Chris Brooks coming at you this year. What does that mean to you to see that the program's kind of getting back to it? You're finally starting to see talent kind of come back up to your level, and
Yeah.
now you have some company with the 1,000-point club.
Yeah, it's exciting, man. I want that record to be broken. I want more of those kids playing basketball in the summer, and I want to see that program thrive. I'm confident that it will. Coach Cullen is a guy who I hated playing against when I was in high school. When he coached at Canfield, we played against them in some summer leagues. It was a nightmare. It was a nightmare because they were so disciplined defensively. They were so disciplined in everything that they did. They set hard screens. They just played the right way. Hard-nosed kids who were really committed and didn't take any shortcuts. it was really, really difficult to play against them. And to know that he's on our side now, we're in pretty good hands. So I'm excited. There's another 1,000-point scorer, and excited for the future of the program.
Now, I don't want this to turn into like a "Where Are They Now" segment, make you feel so old. But what have you been up to lately? What are you got going on now in your life?
Oh man, if you haven't heard them yet, I got 3 little kids. My wife and I have been married for 11 years. We got 3 little ones, a 10-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 3-year-old. We live in Mesa, Arizona. And I, for the last 7 years, have worked for a medical device company called Stryker, which I love, and has given me a nice competitive outlet. You know, we talk about being an athlete way back when. You know, you sort of lose you can't jump as high, you can't run as fast, can't dribble, can't shoot like you used to, but you're still competitive, right? We're all still competitive, and I work for a company that allows me to be competitive and encourages it. So I'm very, very happy with that. Obviously thrilled to have the 3 kids. Most of the time they're pretty good kids, but we're excited to be out in Arizona and enjoying some of the sunshine.
Here's the thing: they're trying to get to that age. Do they have athletic ability? Have you passed that down yet?
That's a good question. I hope so. I hope so. Selfishly, I think they do. My daughter's a big tennis fan. My son, my 6-year-old, is hitting a baseball pretty far. My 3-year-old, that's to be determined. I mean, he can jump off the couch really well. That's about it. But I think they like sports. I think they like to compete. I don't know when basketball is going to come into play, if it is at all. But as long as they compete at whatever they do, I'm going to be perfectly happy with it.
Now, how much did your degree at Westminster kind of fit into this job you're in now?
My degree at Westminster is in public relations, and there's some transferable skills there. I think mostly what I do now is relationship based. It's basically sales, and the relationships that I built at Westminster, not so much within the degree, not so much within the program academically, but the relationships and going through the athletic program there. And then sort of having that on your resume as an extracurricular, and some of the other things that I did while I was at school, it all really does help. It all is valuable life lessons that I'm applying now. Even, I'm 37 years old. I'm far removed from Westminster College or South Range basketball or anything like that. But that stuff sticks with you. How you treat people and how you're taught to treat people at places like South Range and at places like Westminster, that stuff has paid off. And I'm using it all the time.
Now, quarantine has kept us in the house the last couple of weeks. What has been your favorite quarantine in-house activity?
My favorite quarantine, I watched Tiger King twice. And I'm saying that out loud. This is probably I shouldn't have said it. I watched Tiger King all the way through twice, once on my own and once again because my wife hadn't seen it. And honestly, so far, that's been pretty consumptive of my time, I guess. But other than that, I'm really enjoying The Last Dance, Michael Jordan documentary. All my answers are going to revolve around TV, so that's probably not good. But this Bulls documentary is pretty captivating.
You bring up The Last Dance because your basketball generation grew up with Michael Jordan. That was kind of the idol. Nowadays, it's LeBron James. What's it like kind of reliving The Last Dance and kind of reliving all the feelings that watching that Bulls team kind of had for you?
It's awesome. It is awesome. And I work with people who are younger than me that didn't experience that, and to go through it and to picture where I was when he did the shrug and where I was. The game that they didn't highlight that much a few weeks ago was the game when he came to Cleveland and scored 69 and had 18 rebounds and beat the Cavs in overtime. That was my very first live NBA game. So my dad and I got tickets for that when I was 8 or 9 and went to that game. He goes off and scores 69 points, and that was my first impression of basketball. I thought that was normal. I thought somebody did that every game, and this is going to be great. I'm just going to stick with this. Don't worry about any other sports. Somebody's going to go off every game like this. It's going to be amazing, and I'm going to fall in love with it. I ended up doing that, but to relive the three-peats that he went through, to hear more about his background and his story with everything that he did coming out of college and in the Olympics and things like that. It's awesome to watch. It's so cool.
Now you're kind of in the same age range as LeBron James. I think he came out of high school right around when you did, right?
Yep.
So
Yeah, a year or two behind me, I think.
what's it like kind of seeing the way basketball has changed and seeing what he's doing and knowing that you're kind of the same age as that?
Yeah, it's something, it's unfortunate. I think we've probably become a little bit numb to it because he's been in the spotlight forever. But thinking back on how lucky we all were to go and see him play as a 15, 16, 17-year-old kid, nobody has that. We have that. We got to go see that. And it's special. It's really, really special to see what he's, obviously accomplished, specifically for the Cavs. I could do without his Heat years, and I could do without him being in LA. Would prefer for him to be in Cleveland, forever, but and eventually own the team. That would be nice too. It's so cool to watch. It's humbling to know that he came from the same area code as we did, from the same kind of background, and yeah, it's just fun. It's just fun to watch. I'm not a Lakers fan, but I want him to keep doing well.
Now, before we let you go, I just want to give you the chance. What kind of advice would you give to seniors right now that are either lost their senior season or really going through? What kind of advice would you give to them?
Yeah, that's a really good question, man. And it stinks. It stinks to lose. I can't put that into words. I've got no real comparison to that. I never had an injury that took a season away. I never had a cancellation of anything like that. To have that taken away, it just stinks. So above all, I feel bad. I feel bad for those kids that they lose those games, that they lose those opportunities to make memories with their teammates and their communities. My advice to them would probably be similar to the advice that I give to my kids. It's, you might not get to go play right now, but you can find a way to compete at something, right? It's something. You can find a way to compete. I would say stay connected to your friends. Above all, be safe. Be safe for your parents' sake and for your grandparents' sake, above all else. But it's going to pass. We're going to get back to sports. We're going to get back to normal activity at some point. And there's going to be a difference between those who spent the quarantine preparing for it and those who didn't. So if you're not a senior and you were a sophomore or a junior and you've got a season in 6 months, there's going to be a difference between those athletes who sat around doing nothing and those who were getting a workout in every once in a while, preparing for something, right? Who knows when it is? Who knows what it's going to look like? Who knows if fans will be there? Nobody really knows. But if there's an opportunity to compete, wake up in the morning and get a workout in and get one in before you go to bed at night, not even knowing when that season's going to come around, it's worth it. It's worth it to maintain that athlete's mentality, even through quarantine.
All right, Chris, thank you so much for joining us today. It's great to hear from you. You're definitely one of the players that YSN wishes that they could go back and kind of cover back in the day, because that would have been a real fun time. You guys played in a lot of great games, and we appreciate you stopping by and giving us some perspective of South Range back in the day.
I appreciate it, Anthony. Thanks, man.
All right.
All right, we'll see you.